children's book publishing. She worked at Scholastic in New York City. She earned a master's degree in library science, and she spent a decade as editor and director of publications at the Institute for Philosophy and Public Policy at the University of Maryland. She went ahead and she got her PhD from Princeton. She then joined the faculty here. She's done a great deal of work on ethics, and there's a brief description in the program about her, especially issues around ethics and the family. One of her books was Liberalism Reconsidered, The Moral Foundations of Civil Rights, Values, and Public Policy. And then she has another book that's about to come out on ethics and children's literature. And she's actually written over 50 books of children's literature, and much of her work in philosophy is around the ethics that we see in children's literature. And so she most recently has written a book called Zero Tolerance for kids, and another book called Kelsey Green, Reading Queen. So she is retiring, but not really retiring, because she continues to write children's books, and part of the retirement is actually to have more time to pursue this other side of her career that she's been doing simultaneously in children's book writing. So she's very diverse, very interesting, an incredible amount of life experience. And so Claudia, welcome.
Well, good morning, and congratulations, graduates, families, friends. We're here today to celebrate the conferring of degrees in that oldest of academic disciplines, philosophy. When the Wizard of Oz rummaged in his black bag to find a diploma to give to the Scarecrow, the degree he ended up offering was Doctor of Thinkology. You today are graduates in that field. Other PhDs are Doctors of Philosophy in history, chemistry, linguistics. Our PhDs alone are Doctors of Philosophy in philosophy. This ceremony represents the completion of a significant accomplishment, but commencement is not an ending, but a beginning. A degree in philosophy is an impressive credential for many life paths. I read in Forbes magazine that top companies today are no longer looking to hire narrowly educated business majors. They want liberal arts majors who can adjust to a diverse and tumultuous world. They want people who can think. I can practically guarantee you that whatever your future life or career choices, the ability to think will come in remarkably handy. Philosophy develops critical thinking skills in a way unrivaled elsewhere in the university. In fact, when I was at the defense for Mary Grace's lovely honors thesis, where she went to a local elementary school and shared philosophy with fifth graders, she defended her project by saying that philosophy was a way of teaching critical thinking skills to kids. Well, on the committee was also my colleague Wes Morrison and I, and we were flummoxed when the non-philosopher on the committee, a faculty member from a different department, questioned the claim that philosophy was the only and best way of teaching critical thinking skills. We stared at him, nonplussed. Of course philosophy is the best. We wrote the book on critical thinking skills, Aristotle's Logic, 2.5 millennia ago. Philosophy is unparalleled at teaching skills that are unparalleled as preparation for careers in a rapidly changing world, and perhaps more important, as preparation for engaged, questioning citizenship. And yet, in my over 20 years of teaching in the philosophy department at CU, I only once met a student who had majored in philosophy for instrumental reasons, as a means to achieve something else. That student explained to me that she was majoring in philosophy because it's the best pre-law major, which it is, and she was going to go on to law school to study business law, and she wanted to study business law because she wanted to become an attorney who would make a lot of money, and she wanted to make a lot of money so she could go to the mall. I think of her sometimes, and I hope she's shopping happily, wherever she is. Oh, and there was one other student, a double major in theater and philosophy, who told me that theater was his first choice, but he'd added the philosophy major so he'd have something to fall back on. But with those two exceptions, every student I ever taught majored in philosophy for the same reason that all of us ended up on the philosophy department faculty. The reason is simple. One day, we fell in love. I did a little survey of my colleagues in preparation for writing this talk. I asked them when and how they first fell in love with philosophy. Of course, some of them had to challenge the wording of my question. What did I mean by fall in love? Was it really accurate to describe this as falling in love? Oh well. Here are a few of their stories. Some of them did fall in love with the enterprise of critical thinking itself. Not one, not two, but 3 of my colleagues fell in love with philosophy when they first encountered the crystalline intellect of Bertrand Russell. Michael Tooley, Allison Jagger, and John Fisher all read Russell and were stunned to find that they could challenge received wisdom, cut through gobbledygook and waffle, and ask why we actually believed something. David Boonick fell in love with philosophy when he realized that even as an undergraduate, he could argue against Plato. On what grounds, I asked him? That Plato was wrong. He and Graham Forbes both wanted to grow up to be like Socrates. Forbes read Plato's dialogue, The Euthyphro, where Socrates happens upon a fellow who's heading off to prosecute his own father for impiety. As always, Socrates professes to be delighted that he's encountered someone who can enlighten him, in this case, on what impiety is. And when the poor fellow starts it on his account, as always, Socrates tears him to bits. I wanted to do that too, Forbes told me. But this tearing to bits is also preparation for building a more sturdy structure of belief. Graham Oddie heard one of his professors offer a devastating objection to Karl Popper's theory of truth and realized that in philosophy, you could actually prove interesting stuff. Some of my colleagues fell in love with philosophy's questions, especially when they found that these questions couldn't be answered anywhere else. Both of our philosophers of science asked the physicists hard questions about the underlying foundations of quantum mechanics and found themselves directed elsewhere. Go talk to the philosophers, Carol Cleland was told with a shrug. So she did. Some of us fell in love despite unpromising circumstances. Bob Pasnow sat in a class in a dismal basement room with a horrible teacher where he understood only half of what was taught at best. The subject matter, St. Augustine. Pasnow is now our scholar of medieval philosophy. Wes Morriston's father made him promise he wouldn't take any philosophy in college. Wes broke that promise his first year, taking a course where he pondered questions about the existence of God. His current area of expertise, philosophy of religion. Mitzi Lee took a first college course with a range of texts well over the head of any freshman, such as Bernard Williams's Ethics and the Limits of Philosophy. She fell in love with Plato and is now our resident expert in ancient philosophy. Of course, some of us fell in love because we did have wonderful teachers. Mike Humer still remembers a TA who came into class pretending to be a robot. The class had to ask questions to determine whether she was conscious or not. Can you feel emotions? Yes, I can. Dave Barnett, kneeling by the window, aged 11, wondered where the universe ended, and then wondered what was on the other side of the universe. Michael Zimmerman was a miserable and unhappy college student, that is to say, just a normally neurotic young man, when he realized that only philosophy could satisfy his deepest cravings, because you can never get enough of what you don't really want. Eric Schwang read a mere 3-page long article by Ernest Gettier on necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. Those 3 pages changed his life. Adam Hussein fell in love, like really fell in love, when he first read this line from Rousseau. One thinks himself the master of others and still remains a greater slave than they. Chris Heathwood only later found out that the stuff he was already in love with happened to be philosophy. What he first fell in love with was late-night dorm conversations about the ontology of time. Is the world a 4-dimensional object with time the 4th dimension? He and his buddies worked out a model of the space-time continuum represented by a tube of chocolate chip cookie dough sliced at various intervals. This led to their college mantra, a variation on the song lyric, "All we are is dust in the wind." Theirs was, all we are is chips in the dough. And here's mine. I was in a Walden Books in a mall, yes, a mall, when I was in high school, and I picked up a modern library edition of the Stoic and Epicurean philosophers on a bargain book table. I opened the book to Epictetus, and this is what I read. What say you, fellow? Chain me? My leg you will chain, yes, but my will, not even Zeus can conquer that. I was slain. And then I read, go then and act your tragedy, but I will not do so. You ask me, why? I answer, because you count yourself to be but an ordinary thread in the tunic. What follows then? You ought to think how you can be like other men. Just as one thread does not wish to have something special to distinguish it from the rest. But I want to be the purple, that touch of brilliance which gives distinction and beauty to the rest. Why then do you say to me, make yourself like unto the many? If I do that, I shall no longer be the purple. I never look back. Collecting these love stories, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to include all of them, made me realize that when I teach my philosophy courses, heretical as this may sound, I care less about developing critical thinking than I do about developing appreciative thinking. What I really want is for my students to fall in love. The first philosophy class I ever took in college was an Intro to Ethics class, where we read 4 great philosophers, Nietzsche, Rawls, Sidgwick, and Marx. I fell in love 4 times. Now these philosophers hold views that are incompatible with one another. Sidgwick is one of the greatest utilitarians. Rawls's greatest work in political philosophy argues against utilitarianism. Nietzsche and Marx would both have had little use for the tame liberalism of either Sidgwick or Rawls. To try to believe the central claims of all these philosophers at once would be impossible, for their claims are at crucial points diametrically opposed. But you can love all 4. Love doesn't have to be governed by the law of non-contradiction. So when I teach my own Intro to Ethics class, I offer up texts I love and see if I can get my students to love them as well. We start the course by reading Tolstoy's novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, the story of a life gone wrong. We then read great works in the history of philosophy, from Aristotle and Epictetus to Kant and Mill to Nietzsche and Sartre, to try to see if we can figure out a better way to live. On the last day of the course, I ask my students to vote. If they could go back in time and give only one of these texts to the young Ivan Ilyich, which one would they choose? I did that just last week for the last time. Aristotle won. When I teach my beloved Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I have to resist grading my students on the basis of how much they come to love him. Now, Amanda can attest that I have given A's to many gorgeous papers, highly critical of the Citizen of Geneva. And yet, Nietzsche wrote that we can judge philosophers by the quality of their laughter. Maybe it isn't too terrible to judge them on the quality of their love. What I hope and believe our students have received during their time with us is learning how to love better, to learn what's most worth loving and what risks are worth taking on behalf of what they love, to love truth and the search for truth, to love the beauty of challenging, infuriating ideas, to love a life lived with an open mind and a questing heart. Oh, and for what it's worth, philosophy is a terrific thing to fall back on. The mother of one of my former Intro to Ethics students told me that when her son was halfway through U.S. Army basic training, he asked her to overnight his copy of Epictetus. So graduates, I wish for all of you that you spend the rest of your lives loving fiercely and freely, searching for what is worth loving and holding fast to it when you find it. To you who were brave enough to devote years of your life to the study of philosophy, I say to you, there are lots of ordinary threads in the tunic. You will find, as you go on in life, if you haven't found out already, there's no shortage of ordinary threads. We came to philosophy because we thought it was the purple. So go and be the purple and love the purple. Thank you.